He left her with nothing. That was the headline of the gossip. The verdict of relatives. The final judgment of friends who watched the marriage collapse from the outside. But let me ask you something first. If a woman walks away without a fight, without tears, without begging, does that mean she lost? Or does it mean she knows something no one else does? Sign here, Dickson Paul said, his voice firm, rehearsed, almost bored. The divorce papers lay between them on the polished desk of a law office in Lekki Phase 1. I built everything we have. You didn't contribute. I won't be cheated out of my own sweat. Precious Esther Paul looked at the document, then at the man she once prayed for every morning. She didn't argue. She didn't remind him of the nights she stayed awake while he chased ideas that failed. She didn't mention the sacrifices that never made it into his memory. Instead, she picked up the pen and signed. That silence unsettled Dickson more than shouting ever could. Outside, Lagos moved on, traffic snarled, vendors shouted prices, generators hummed. Inside, a marriage died without ceremony. Dickson stood up immediately, straightened his jacket, already victorious. You can collect your things tomorrow, he said. I'll have the driver assist you. Precious nodded once. Flashback. A small living room in Surrey, years earlier. Her father, Gabriel David, thin from illness but sharp-eyed, held her hands tightly. Some people shout their strength, he told her. Others protect it. Never confuse silence with weakness. He had placed a brown envelope in her bag that day. She never opened it in Dickson's presence. Some things were not meant to be explained. Back in the present, Precious moved out quietly. One suitcase. Old clothes. No jewelry. No drama. Neighbors whispered. Church members shook their heads. Even her aunt warned her. Pride will finish you. Precious smiled politely. Pride was not what she was carrying. Dickson, meanwhile, flourished, or so it seemed. A promotion. New contracts. A louder life. Within months, he appeared online with Sandra Cole, polished, ambitious, everything that reflected success. Peace is expensive, Dickson told friends. I paid for it. They laughed. They toasted him. No one asked what peace built on ignorance. Eventually costs. Precious settled into a modest apartment in Yoba. She found work quietly. She kept her routine simple. What no one noticed were the meetings she attended without announcement, the documents she reviewed late at night, or the respect she received from people who never spoke loudly. Foreshadowing has a rhythm. It sounds like patience. It sounds like someone letting you believe you've won, and Dickson believed it completely, unaware that what he thought he owned was only on the surface. Unaware that the woman he left with nothing had been holding everything. Long before he ever entered her life, Dickson Paul enjoyed being admired. It made the long nights feel justified, the broken promises forgivable. In the months after the divorce, admiration came easily. His office on Victoria Island grew louder, his laughter sharper. Colleagues congratulated him on starting fresh, as if marriage were a failed investment he'd finally divested from. He accepted the praise without correction. Sandra Cole fit neatly into his new image. She spoke confidently, dressed with intention, and understood how to be seen. Together, they looked like progress. She called Precious the past without ever meeting her. Dickson didn't disagree. He preferred forgetting to remembering. At work, his tech firm landed a major logistics contract. Champagne flowed. Photos circulated. Dickson raised his glass and spoke about vision, resilience, leadership. Not once did he mention luck. Not once did he mention timing. He believed success responded to confidence alone. Across the city, Precious Esther lived a quieter rhythm. Her Yaba apartment smelled of fresh coffee and old books. She worked during the day as a business analyst, unassuming, precise. At night, she reviewed files that carried weight far beyond her small living room. Balance sheets. Trust agreements. Old share certificates stamped and signed years before Dickson ever knew her name. Flashback. A hospital corridor. Her father's voice low, steady. People respect noise, Gabriel David had said. But ownership does not announce itself. It waits. She remembered the pressure of the envelope in her hands. The responsibility settling before grief had fully arrived. In the present. Precious met regularly with Charles Bennett, a senior attorney who had known her father well. Their meetings were discreet. No raised voices. No dramatics. Just clarity. Charles asked questions. Precious answered carefully. Each conversation tightened a thread that had been loose for too long. Dickson, unaware, began to feel untouchable. When a junior partner warned him about shifting regulations, he waved it off. "We're solid," he said. "Our investors trust us." He didn't know who "our" really included. He didn't ask Dot at a charity dinner in Ikoyi. Sandra squeezed his hand and whispered, "You've come so far." Dickson smiled, pride warming his chest. Across the room, someone mentioned a quiet restructuring in the industry. New holdings. Silent acquisitions. Dickson half listened, distracted by applause meant for him. Precious attended a different kind of gathering that same evening. No cameras. No speeches. Just a boardroom table and a few people who valued accuracy over ego. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, the room leaned in. Her name wasn't on the company yet, but her authority was already felt. Foreshadowing doesn't rush Dot, it waits for arrogance to finish speaking. Dickson drove home that night convinced he had escaped loss. Precious returned to her apartment aware that loss had simply changed direction. The city slept, unaware that two futures were moving toward each other, one loudly confident, the other quietly prepared. Dickson Paul had grown careless. Confidence had turned into complacency. His tech firm, once a rising star in Lagos' bustling business landscape, began showing small cracks. Delayed contracts. Misplaced invoices. Investor questions that made him frown but never truly worry. Minor setbacks, he told Sandra Cole as they walked along Leckie's waterfront one evening. Nothing we can't handle. But beneath the surface, the foundation was shifting. Precious Esther, still quiet, was no longer invisible. Through a series of strategic consultations and discreet meetings, she had started ensuring that her father's legacy, the envelope he pressed into her hands years ago, was recognized. Ownership had been hers all along, hidden behind trusts and shares that Connell never noticed. Flashback. Years before, Gabriel David had spent sleepless nights calculating risk. He had chosen not to announce his intentions, warning Precious, "Greed sees what's in front of it. Wisdom protects what lies beneath." She had nodded at the time, unable to fully grasp the weight of his advice. Now she understood. Timing, patience, and discretion had been her weapons all along. Back in the present, Dickson hosted an investor meeting. He entered with a broad smile, thinking all eyes were on his charm, his apparent authority. But subtle remarks from board members hinted at discomfort. Shareholder shifts. New votes he wasn't aware of. He laughed them off, brushing aside the unease as paranoia. Meanwhile, Precious attended a confidential meeting with Charles Bennett. By now, Dickson Paul's confidence was almost tangible. He walked through his Lagos office like a king in a kingdom he believed he built. Investors praised him. Colleagues flattered him. And Sandra Cole beamed beside him, reinforcing the illusion of his invincibility. He was untouchable, or so he thought, but the first signs of change had begun. Emails he ignored, minor discrepancies in contracts. Subtle remarks in board meetings all pointed to one undeniable fact: someone else had quietly taken the reins. The company he believed he controlled was shifting beneath his feet. Across town, Precious Esther sat in a glass-walled boardroom on Victoria Island. Her presence was calm, almost ordinary, but it carried weight. The room was filled with lawyers, accountants, and corporate advisors, all of whom had long known her authority. They discussed contracts, corporate governance, and investor relations. Every move Dickson had thought was his own had, in fact, been silently overseen by her. Flashback. A rainy evening in Surler. Precious had been reading her father's carefully drafted trust agreements late into the night. She remembered the way his hand trembled slightly as he explained each clause. Control can be invisible. Precious. People always underestimate the quiet ones. They assume ownership is loud. Never forget that. At the time, it seemed like distant advice. Now every word had become a blueprint for action. Back in the present, Dickson scheduled a high-profile meeting with potential investors in Lekki. He imagined applause, handshakes, and the inevitable headlines showcasing his brilliance. Instead, he entered a room already in session, only to find the chairman announcing the representative of the majority shareholder. The room went quiet. Dickson's heart beat faster. He scanned the faces, expecting someone else, maybe a corporate executive, a senior lawyer. And then she walked in. Precious Esther. Not the woman he had dismissed as powerless. Not the one he believed had nothing. But calm, composed, and commanding attention effortlessly. Her presence alone silenced the room. Dickson's arrogance faltered for the first time in years. "Good evening, Mr. Paul," she said. Her voice was soft, but carried authority. Every word resonated through the space. "I understand there have been some questions regarding corporate control and voting rights. Allow me to clarify." Dickson stumbled over his words. He tried to assert control, to remind everyone that he had been running this company, building it, and directing its success. But each attempt to regain authority was met with polite corrections and references to official documents he had never seen. He realized, piece by piece, that the empire he thought he owned had always been hers legally. Financially, completely. Every contract, every strategic move, every victory he celebrated had been under her oversight. For the first time, Dickson Paul understood the consequences of underestimating the woman he had left behind. Silence, patience, and strategy had been her weapons, and now they were dismantling his illusions of power. Foreshadowing had become reality, and the final reveal, the moment that would leave him reeling, was still to come. Dickson Paul sat frozen in his corner of the boardroom, the hum of fluorescent lights above mixing with the pounding of his heart. Precious Esther's calm authority was suffocating. Every board member, every advisor, every lawyer present nodded subtly in her direction. He realized with a mix of disbelief and horror that every contract, every major decision, and every asset he had assumed he owned was legally under her control. Precious didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The law, the documents, the contracts, those were her instruments of power. She spoke softly, but each word carried weight. "Mr. Paul," she said, "the company you've been managing is held in a trust that was established before your marriage. All shares are legally mine. Your decisions as managing director were always subject to my authority. You were never the sole owner." Dickson's face flushed, a mixture of rage, shame, and disbelief. "You what? How is this even possible?" His voice cracked, betraying the panic he tried to suppress. Flashback. Years ago. Gabriel David, Precious's father, had meticulously built a silent empire, distributing shares through a series of trusts that protected the company from outsiders. He had given his daughter the final authority, knowing that greed and ambition often blind people to the truth. "Power," he had said, "doesn't need to be announced. It must simply exist. Wait until they underestimate you." Back in the present, Precious allowed a moment of silence. She let the truth settle into the room. Dickson's arrogance, which had once dominated every conversation, now seemed petty and fragile. The room absorbed the tension, recognizing the quiet genius in her strategy. Sandra Cole, standing beside him, gasped lightly. Even she had never imagined this. The glamorous life she believed she was building with Dickson suddenly felt hollow. The applause of investors and colleagues faded as murmurs of amazement filled the boardroom. Dickson stumbled over words, trying to reclaim authority, but the documents she presented were irrefutable. Every clause, every signed certificate, every recorded shareholder vote, it all pointed to one undeniable fact. He had been managing her empire all along, completely unaware. Precious spoke again, calmly, without accusation. "I didn't seek revenge. I sought responsibility. Your arrogance made you blind. And yet it was never about taking from you. It was always about protecting what was entrusted to me." The room held its breath. Dickson's pride shattered quietly. He realized that the woman he had dismissed, mocked, and left behind was not only his equal, but had always been the true architect of their shared success. Flashback. Late nights of paperwork, hidden legal agreements, strategic decisions, all carried out silently, with patience and foresight. Gabriel David's advice echoed in her mind. Let them think they've won. Wait for the moment when truth speaks louder than their arrogance. Dickson's voice was barely audible. All this time? Yes, Precious replied softly. All this time. The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. In that silence, Dickson understood fully the cost of underestimating her. Humility, regret, and a profound lesson about pride. The twist wasn't just in ownership, it was in perception. The man who believed he had conquered had been a pawn, unknowingly carrying the weight of her empire while thinking it was his own. And for Precious, the revelation wasn't vengeance, it was freedom. The boardroom remained frozen for a moment, the weight of truth pressing on everyone present. Dickson Paul, once confident and untouchable, sat slumped in his chair, the reality of his misjudgment sinking in. All his years of ambition, all his bravado, all his celebrations, they had been illusions. Precious Esther had been quietly, relentlessly in control all along. She looked at him not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm clarity that cut deeper than any accusation could. "Dickson," she said, "you left me with nothing, yet you never realized I already owned everything. Ownership isn't always visible. Sometimes it waits for the right moment to reveal itself." Dickson's chest tightened. I thought I had it all," he admitted, voice trembling. I didn't see." "You didn't look," she replied simply. The words were sharp yet gentle, like a scalpel removing the illusion of superiority he had carried for years. Flashback. Precious remembered all the late nights she had spent studying the trust documents, meeting with advisors, quietly making decisions that no one would notice. Each step had been deliberate, a calculated patience taught to her by her father. She had learned the most powerful form of revenge wasn't destruction, it was preparation, foresight, and integrity. Back in the present, the investors and board members looked on with awe. They saw not just a woman reclaiming authority, but a story of endurance, intelligence, and quiet power triumphing over arrogance and betrayal. Even Sandra Cole, who had believed she was entering a partnership of convenience, looked at Precious with a mix of respect and disbelief. Dickson's pride, once so loud and untouchable, was reduced to silence. He realized how deeply he had underestimated her, not just as a partner, but as a person. Every dismissal, every insult, every selfish assumption now weighed heavily on him. Precious stood, her posture graceful but firm. "I'm not here to destroy you," she said. "I'm here to do what's right for the company, for the people who trusted us, and for myself. You will learn humility, and I will reclaim my life." The emotional punch was total. Viewers could feel the shift. Betrayal replaced by enlightenment, arrogance replaced by respect, loss replaced by empowerment. Precious walked out of the room with her head held high, leaving Dickson to confront his own reflection in the glossy glass walls of the office. Foreshadowing fulfilled itself. The man who thought he had won lost far more than money. The woman he dismissed found freedom, control, and self-respect. The empire had always been hers, her father's foresight, her discipline, her patience, the invisible power. She had quietly held, and now it was hers in full dot as she stepped outside into the Lagos skyline. The city's lights seemed to celebrate her triumph. Not revengeful, not bitter, but victorious in the way only true resilience allows. The story closed with a lesson universal and enduring. Never underestimate the quiet, the patient, or the prepared. Sometimes those who seem to have nothing are the ones holding everything. And Dickson? He would never forget the woman he left behind.